everyone. It's been a busy start to 2026. State and federal legislatures are back in session, and MAMA has been working to help advance several important bills across the country. And as you're probably aware, there's a major lawsuit unfolding in California right now against social media companies. Mama's chapters have been showing up to support the families involved there, as well as to inform the public and press about the importance of holding companies like Meta accountable for the harms they're knowingly perpetrating against our children. We will include links in the show notes to what Mama is saying in the news. We've always said that child safety online is a big tent issue, and one of the most exciting examples of bipartisan collaboration is the Sunset Section 230 Act. This bill was proposed by Senator Graham, Senator Durbin, and Representative Hagman at the end of last year and proposes to sunset Section 230 of the Communications Decency Act 2 years after the law is enacted to force regulators to come up with a better solution. Why is that important? Well, Section 230 has provided a form of immunity to social media companies, and they have hid behind it despite creating algorithms designed to addict that amplify content that is harmful and designed to enrage or sow discord. As Wyoming Congresswoman Harriet Hagman explained, enacted in 1996, Section 230 granted tech companies broad immunity for content removal at a time when we could not have anticipated the influence, scope, and pervasiveness of social media and other ways to communicate. MAMA supports these reform efforts, not as a means of slowing the progress of technology, but as a way to ensure that the giant corporations are held accountable for the products they design and any real-world harms they cause. Since our last Expert Insights talk, we've had some substantial wins. Thanks to several letter writing campaigns that generated thousands and thousands of letters, plus other activities, MAMA's nationwide helped to pass 18 separate pieces of legislation last year, including AI safety legislation in California and New York. We helped pass bell-to-bell phone bans in numerous states, and just as important as what we passed was what we prohibited. Twice last year, we helped defeat a dangerous federal proposal to prohibit states from regulating AI. We beat it back in the summer, and then again at the end of the year in the Defense Spending Act. Thanks to concerned parents, allies, and mamas around the country, like you, we are entering 2026 with incredible momentum, and lawmakers everywhere are lining up to do more. Our priorities for 2026 are to continue supporting legislation around child safety in the form of duty of care requirements that include privacy protections, distraction-free learning like bell-to-bell school phone bans, and privacy and safety around AI chatbots. As we all know, getting safeguards enacted is often a protracted and challenging process, and MAMA is committed to winning the fight. I want you to know that we couldn't do this work without you, so thank you for your support, for showing up and making your voices heard. Together, we're making a difference, and I'm excited to see what we'll be able to accomplish this year. So Mama's working for change, and part of that change is educating folks about the harms of media addiction and the benefits of centering healthy childhoods around real-life experiences and interactions. As we think about our programming, we're also evolving our Expert Insight series so that we can provide these conversations on a more regular basis. We know you're all busy too, so instead of live events, we're experimenting with pre-recorded videos like this one so that you can listen on your schedule. To kick this off, I'm delighted to bring you a conversation with Graham Burnett, who is the Henry Charles Lee Professor of History and History of Science at Princeton University. He is the co-author of Attensity, a manifesto of the attention liberation movement, as well as 12 theses on attention, both with the Friends of Attention Coalition, who are the creators of the nonprofit Strother School of Radical Attention in Brooklyn, New York, which Burnett directs. Graham co-curated the Practices of Attention program at the 33rd Sao Paulo Biennial and is associated with the speculative collective Strother, which I hope I'm saying correctly, and I hope he'll come on soon and correct me if I get wrong. In 2023, he was a visiting artist at the Academy of Fine Arts in Helsinki, Finland, and he writes widely on technology, culture, and media. Graham, thank you so much for joining us.
Hello. It's a pleasure to be here.
Well, to start, I couldn't help but notice how rich and diverse your career is. You're definitely not a single lane kind of scholar. You're a historian of science, a writer, an artist, an educator, an activist. And what I notice is these aren't really siloed areas for you. So how would you describe the through line through these different ways of interacting with others in the world?
Oh, wow. Thank you. Well, first, let me just say what a pleasure it is to be here and how much I admire the work that you and your coalition and your membership are doing. It's such important work. And there are really kind of happy connections between Mama's projects and the projects around attention that have been so much at the heart of my appetites and interests and that of many friends and colleagues for quite a while now. So I think basically, Julie, I'm a teacher kind of person as well as a student kind of person. And for me, those two things are so tangled up. So when asked what holds together the writing, the performance, the activism, and the scholarship, I would say that a life of being a kind of perpetual student, interested in things, and then a person who's interested in sharing the kinds of things I feel like I'm trying to understand.
Well, as a historian of science, what do you mean by attention? Can you speak a bit about the history of attention and why it's important for us in this moment?
Yeah, for sure. So that's exactly right. I did my PhD in the history and philosophy of science. And historians of science are a mess of proper historians who get interested in the place of science and technology in society and culture in our lives. And I've been doing research on the scientific study of attention in laboratories for sort of the last decade or so now. So I first got interested in attention in relation to some artistic projects. You mentioned the Sao Paulo Biennial back in 2018, and I'd been involved for a long time with a really fun artist collective that sort of activated attention in our performances. But it was when I started doing research on the laboratory study of attention that things really began to open up for me. And it ties pretty closely to the work that you and your colleagues do with respect to media addiction.
You've I've seen you note, and Mama has noted that the research shows our attention spans have been dwindling and dwindling. I think it's down to 47 seconds is the average now. As shocking as that tiny span of time is, it also feels kind of true to this moment that we're in. So I know I have so much coming at me all day long between notifications and texts, emails, Slack. And that's not even the interactions in my real life with my family and my friends. So, what do you think the role of the media is in this shrinking of our attention span? And when did it start?
Yeah, so that stuff about doing research on the scientific study of attention, that goes to the heart of it. It's true that there's scientific research suggesting that attention spans are shortening. But the thing that interests me actually is where we got going with the idea of measuring our attention durationally. Like, where do you even get the idea of an attention span? When we, as the sort of friends of attention or the work we do at the Strother School of Radical Attention in Brooklyn, all this kind of attention activism work that my colleagues and I are committed to, whenever we talk about attention, everyone's very quick to be like, oh, my attention span's a disaster. But our question to them back is, why do you think of your attention in that way? And the fact of the matter is, 100 years of laboratory research sliced and diced human attention, meaning measured it, treated it quantitatively, and examined it instrumentally, operationally, with respect to working on devices, because that's what experimental psychologists studied. And that slicing and dicing of attention sort of set up the pricing of attention in our attention economy, which is at the heart of the media addiction problem you study. So the work we do with attention activism is less about how can I take my attention span from 47 seconds to a minute and a half, and more, how can I think more broadly about my attention and the way it can bring me closer to the things I care about in my life, other people, and the world. And that kind of attention awareness is, we believe, crucial to the real emancipation that we need from our current sort of media ecosystem.
I love the language you're using about attention awareness because I think that's sort of the first step in taking back this thing that's being lost. Back in 2023, you co-wrote an article for the New York Times in which you used the metaphor of fracking when it comes to what big tech companies are doing to our attention. What did you mean by that?
Yeah, attention economy sounds sort of vaguely friendly or something, or at least it used to. Human fracking is a little truer to what's going on. When we talk about petroleum fracking, getting oil and natural gas out of the earth using fracking techniques, we know that that's bad. And we know it's bad because that technology, which involves pumping down into the earth high pressure, high volume detergent to force deep buried natural gas and petroleum to the surface, produces earthquakes, tectonic instability, surface water pollution. It's bad. Human fracking is almost identical, only what's happening is that high pressure, high volume detergents are being pumped into our faces through low quality slop kind of content promoted via algorithmic feeds and social media. And that high pressure media detergent breaks up the deep structures of our personalities and our capacities to want what we want and be with the things we care about. It harms us. So when we use the language of human fracking, we're emphasizing the extractive business model that is the primary driver of a multi-trillion-dollar industry that is very new. And when you and your membership worry about media addiction, you're worrying about a phenomenon that is a direct result of the deep-pocketed, technologically sophisticated human fracking industry. And so we are allies together in pushing back against that deep challenge to our humanity, not just our kids, but our humanity right now.
I think about advertising and how it's been around for centuries. But when an advertiser was trying to get your attention with a print advertisement in a newspaper or magazine, it's such a different qualitative thing than what we're experiencing now. The evolution of the internet and the rise of these behemoth tech companies, I feel like are making us much more passive participants in our lives. Do you see it that way?
Yeah, I mean, Tim Wu, who's a friend, and I think of him as an ally in all this work, you probably do too.
He's a
In,
mama advisor.
yeah, a special guy. You know, in The Attention Merchants, his book, he sketches the kind of history of the advertising industry. And I think what one takes from that book is that, in fact, the very idea of an advertising industry is itself quite recent. Just because you stood on a street corner and hawked your wares, tried to sell what you had in a basket, it's not really advertising. You know, like, I got chickens here, chickens for sale. Advertising consists in aggregating eyeballs and selling the eyeballs to people who want to promote their wares, so that the real advertising industry arises when the aggregation of attention becomes possible. And that happens in the 19th century. But to compare newspaper advertising in the 19th and early 20th century, or even radio or TV advertising, to what has happened over the last 15 years with the rise of the human tracking project is like comparing lace makers in the 18th century to the satanic mills of the Industrial Revolution in the late 19th century. Both were like making things out of cloth, but they are qualitatively incomparable in scale, in violence, in extent. And so what's at stake really are these kind of cognitive prosthetics, these things we call phones, but which are in fact these intimate tools for every aspect of our daily life. and the societal scale digital networks that make them possible. Until these things existed, you could not directly commodify, turn into money, human curiosity, desire, interest, our relationships with our friends and families. It wasn't possible directly to turn those into money until this very distinctive human fracking ecosystem arose just in the last 10 or 15 years.
So, how do you think these kinds of technological changes or this human fracking ecosystem affect children in particular?
Yeah. So I have some kids of my own, and I can draw on my kind of intimate experience of raising a couple of teen girls, and the challenges of this last 10 or 15 years for those of us who've been parenting in that space. We will look back in 40 years at what has happened in this historic juncture the way we now look back at the cigarette industry and the sort of, you did what? You know, did you really believe that mentholated cigarettes were going to like cure your asthma? Like, Grandpa, was that real?
We used to have smoking lounges in high schools and cigarettes and vending machines, remember?
Yeah, I mean, so thinking like a historian, I think it's powerful for us to project ourselves forward in time and to think the way we'll be asked. You guys used to just kind of give a kid like an iPad that was like kind of obviously a tool for a certain kind of exploitative commercial streaming, and you kind of, and we'll be like, wow, but the kids really like the cartoons. It'll be an interesting conversation, so get ready for it. The short answer is, in the work we do as the Friends of Attention Coalition, and in the work of the School of Radical Attention that we have in Brooklyn, we tend not to work so much with little kids, so it's not core to our kind of problem set. We tend to de-emphasize tech itself as the problem. So we're sympathetic to people who want to get phones out of schools and that kind of thing, but we often want to really emphasize that the problem is the business model, not the devices. If our phones had been invented by our grandmas, we'd use them to call home. If social media had been invented by Buddhist monks, it would not be causing the problems we've got. So we really try to hammer on the problem being the business model. Now, without wanting to sound like a deranged Marxist, capitalism does not care about your children. Capitalism also doesn't really care about you. Capitalism cares about maximizing return on investments. And while markets are very powerful structures for innovation and for solving complex social problems in real time, if markets are not governed by the ethical commitments of their players or by the legal architecture that constrains what can be done, what markets do is they monetize relentlessly without a terrible lot of concern for total maximum human welfare. They'll sacrifice some people's. And our children are being sacrificed, have been being sacrificed by heedless and greedy, self-maximizing capitalists, tech barons, over this last 15-year period. That's just real.
On that happy note, you've described yourself as an optimist. And this idea that at some point people eventually get fed up with being exploited and start to change things. And usually that's when kids start getting harmed. I know that was true for me. I mean, that's why I started Mama in the first place, when I saw how social media was affecting my own kids and I saw all of the teens and tweens who were literally suicidal because of the environment that they were in with their technology. But I also know many parents who feel really helpless. As a historian, how have we as a society confronted similar things that have affected positive change when it came to our kids?
Yeah, very powerful question. I think that kids are really important in the United States in particular for the progress toward regulatory legislative action. So, from a sort of theory of change perspective, Americans have a long-standing willingness to permit adults to harm themselves. We've long said freedom is super important. We're not especially sympathetic to nanny state behavior. And so whether it's cigarettes or alcohol or even drugs, we've tended to be like, well, we can tell that this stuff's bad for you, but if you're a grown up and you want to assess the risks and make those decisions, you can be a base jumper. You're welcome to smoke cigarettes. You're a grown up, make your own decisions. Kids are a different category. And part of, I think, the power and importance of the work you're doing at MAMA is to emphasize that kids are a special category and require special forms of protection. And we've seen the way that children, youth, have been important ground for protective legislation in the past, vis-a-vis labor laws, for instance, et cetera. So broadly speaking, I think as a sort of theory of change calculus, as well as just the moral passion that moves us as parents, emphasizing protecting our kids is a great move. I do, though, want to say, too, that as a person who thinks about the importance of protecting and nurturing and cultivating human flourishing across our lives, we want to make sure that there's good synergy between the kind of targeted theory of change legislative efforts of an organization like MAMA and the kind of work of the Friends of Attention as a coalition and the work of attention activists, because our kids attain to maturity. And once they are 18 and out of the house, there's only so much you can do to sort of regulate their conduct. So part of what we tend to emphasize in our work is picking up when the phone ban thing isn't going to work anymore because everybody's starting to be a grown-up and we've created a culture that passes through these technologies. It's at that point that our messaging about the importance of our achieving collective awareness of the care of our very broad attentional resources, that's when that stuff kicks in. And you can never start too soon. That is, we also run a youth program for high school kids in the summer around attention activism, getting them thinking in terms of an intentional, self-aware relationship to their attention and its cultivation, because they make themselves out of their attention. We want them to be thinking about that, whether they have access to their phones or not in high school, because sooner or later, they're going to spend a lot of their time with their devices, and we want them to have developed the habits that permit them to have rich lives with the device in hand, in the pocket, in the life. Does that feel right? Does that make sense?
Yeah, I mean, I couldn't agree with you more. I mean, I think you're exactly right about the theory of change, and it's the theory of change on which MAMA is based. In this country, it's very hard to get legislation passed, and we've seen lawmakers act more quickly around children than adults. But media addiction is something that affects everybody in society, not only children. I'm media addicted, and I have been experiencing some of the cognitive and physical challenges that come with spending so many hours a day at my screen. So I agree with you. I also think, in your book, Intensity, you and your collaborators talk about a need for systemic and not just individual change. Can you tell us more about why you believe individual change isn't enough?
Oh, thank you so much. Yeah, and this is a nice opportunity for me. I think I'll screen share for a moment so I can show some of your folks in your network the kind of work that we're doing, because it is really so complementary to the work that you all are doing that I so much admire. So, our work has its origins in a nonprofit coalition of artists, activists, educators, parents, and others who believed that we need together to begin to cultivate habits of attention that were resistant to human fracking. That was the sort of core idea. And this community, which had its origins back in 2018 at this art event in Sao Paulo, the Sao Paulo Biennial, we began meeting together and kind of rallying around the kind of cultivation and protection of our attention all the way back on the cusp of 2018, 2019. And it was really an exciting time for kind of the work of thinking and reading and writing together. And we began generating some texts. The probably most important early one of which was the 12 Theses on Attention. And so anybody who'd like to check these out, this was kind of our original manifesto, now translated into like a dozen languages or so. And then in the wake of the kind of tragic death of one of the members of this community, a young man named Matthew Strother, we actually came together to create the Strother School of Radical Attention. And it is the Friends of Attention Coalition that wrote together the Attensity book, all the proceeds of which go to support the nonprofit work. And I'd love, if it's good with you, Julie, to take a second to show kind of what we do at the school. Does that feel good
Yeah,
or
I
right?
love it. Yeah, let's do it.
Yeah, so we basically do two things as our core programming at the school. We run free workshops called Attention Labs, which are like half-day workshops where we talk about our attention, we talk about human fracking, we talk about media addiction, and we get people thinking about the richness and diversity of their attention. So that's like kind of our flagship program, free and in person for folks who are nearby to New York. Then we also have seminars, and our courses are kind of fabulous. There's little charges for these, and most of them are in person at the school, but there are a few that are actually available to folks who are remote. So we run an online class called Attention Activism 101, which is about thinking about the core elements of attention activism: study, organizing, and sanctuary, the creation of sanctuary. And we have an Attention Activism 201, which focuses on the idea of organizing. So for anybody who's within striking distance of New York, please come by, because there's so much interesting stuff going on in our kind of gallery, as well as in our kind of study core program, where we do this really unique kind of street pedagogy, which we've been running now for 2 or 3 years. And if you're not nearby, pick up the book if you would, because the book is so closely aligned with MAMA's mission. It was such a treat to have you, Julie, there at the launch last month. Yeah,
I have my book. We're gonna share in the chat how people can order it, because we have it in the MAMA Bookshop page. So thank you for taking us through that. Can you speak a little about what is the role of community and activism in this work? You described what's happening at the Strother School for Radical Attention, but talk to me about community and talk to me about activism. Like, how do you see those being part of what you're doing?
thank you. Yeah, thank you, Julie. And I didn't do a good job with that question, a moment ago, really. So many books have diagnosed this problem at this point. We all know that there's a problem. We have shelves and shelves of books, Chris Hayes, Johan Hari, Jenny Odell, we know that there's a problem with our attention. We know, in a sense, why we have a problem, because of human fracking. We understand all this. The move of Attensity is to really try to propose a solution. And that solution is not a tech detox. It's not a new screen time app to monitor, although we are supportive of all those kinds of things. If you want to go do a mindfulness retreat, that's cool. If you do yoga, that's great. If you have Screen Zen or Opal on your machine, great. If you have a brick, terrific. Our point is that all those me and my discipline trying to manage are inadequate. There is a $17 trillion series of corporations on the other side of this little glass screen, and your dutiful efforts to try to get better at not going down like a media rabbit hole are basically not going to be enough. So our point is simply, this is about collective action. Collective action like the organizing that you all do at MAMA, and it's all right here in our, it's the collective action of solidarity with our friends. What we need is not another screen time monitor. What we need is our friends. And at the heart of our claim about attention activism is that we're all already doing it. You have, Julie, the things you do with the people you love, where y'all put your devices away and you give your mind and time and senses to each other. And all your listeners, whether they're gardeners or rock climbers, or they sing in a choir, or they go to church or shul, or whatever it is, everybody's got these sanctuaries. And what we need to do now is see that those sanctuaries are under a very special kind of threat, because the frackers want to frack everything. So if we're going to protect...
And they've been doing it.
They're winning. They're winning. They're harming us. Pandemics of loneliness, depression, suicidal ideation. Your listeners know those stats. We know how bad it is. What we need to do is take note of where we feel good, and then protect, nourish, build out. Reach out to your friends. And that, irregular dinner party, let's make it a little more regular. That evening meal, let's go ahead and agree together that we're gonna all put our devices away just for 20 minutes. These are the things that are gonna start to move the movement at scale.
Have you seen the Longest Table Initiative, which I love? It's
I don't. Tell me.
It's Miriam Benikaram started this thing in Chelsea where for block long people just set up long tables, and neighbors come out and they dine together one night during the summer, and it's been replicated all over. I think it's incredible. I hope it goes all over the country. So moving to a slightly different audience now, how does your organization work with educators? Because I seem to have noticed there's something that you do for educators. Is that right?
Yeah, we are literally a school. Our heartland commitments are school commitments. Indeed, we believe that at the heart of attention activism is study. We believe that study is an attentional form, and that one of the ways that the frackers are harming children and adults is that they are disrupting our ability to stay with the things we care about. And that study, not like book learning study, not like SOHCAHTOA, can you do trigonometry study, that's spending time with the music and the books and the movies and the people that matter to you. And that is how we make ourselves and our relationships. So we think that way of thinking about attention, meaning that it has at its heart study, is key. And so one of the ways we built that out is by emphasizing the centrality of the formation of attentional capacities, the centrality of that to education. Education now needs to be the cultivation and formation and nurturing of attentional capacities. 75 years ago, teachers complained that their students weren't paying attention, but they could sort of expect that they would get students who knew how to pay attention. That's gone because the frackers have destroyed that. And now educators must begin with the making of attentional capacities. And so anybody who's out there who's an educator, please consider checking out schoolofattention.org and write in about our Educators for Attention Coalition. We have an interest form and we have monthly meetings to share lesson plans and strategies from K through 12 and up to college and university faculty for thinking about how to foreground questions of attention in the classroom as an attentional sanctuary space, and then what it means to achieve attentional richness as a sort of goal of our educational lives.
I won't go into the neurobiology of attention making, but it is a neurobiological process that children develop, and it can be cultivated or can be redirected in a way that's fracking, right? And we now know that I think it's a little over 40% of 2-year-olds in America have their own device. And so the problems that led me to start Mama now just keep happening at younger and younger ages. And the data is very clear. You know, we've seen a decline in reading. There was a story last week about film majors that don't have the attention to be able to watch an entire film. So,
Can I say a quick thing about that? So I
sure.
would like you to say that statistic again about the 2-year-olds. That's such a shocking number. Did your listeners hear that?
Yeah, it's over 40% of all 2-year-olds in the United States now have their own personal device. And one of the things that worries us so much is they're selling clips for strollers where you can clip on a phone. And so all of that time that your toddler used to spend observing the natural world around them and processing what they were seeing and developing an interest and developing what you would call the capacity to have attention and pay attention is now being interrupted by a constant flow of entertainment. So, you know, we are, Graham, we are very aligned in sort of what we're trying to preserve.
I would like to stick in one more thing for your listeners. It's because you bring up the question of the neurobiology of learning. And there are a lot of neuroscientists in this space, and many of them I think are allies. I know you've had Jonathan Haidt on the show, and of course, Haidt, though not a neurobiologist, is a quantitative sociologist who's marshaled a huge number of important resources to indicate the challenges to youth mental health of these devices. In our book, we adopt a slightly different take, which I want to share with your listeners because it complements the value of scientists in this space. Scientists are great. I'm a historian of science. I think science and technology are both very cool. Where human attention is concerned, every one of your listeners is an expert. And no scientist person can actually lecture you about the experience of your human attention. This is a deep and important point. It's not that scientists don't have things to tell us about, like sort of what happens in our brains when you look at them under an fMRI when we're paying attention. That's cool. But that will never substitute for the experience of your attention. And the reason that's so important is that, remember the tobacco debates? They found lots of scientists to say that tobacco caused cancer, and they found lots of scientists to say that tobacco didn't cause cancer. And right now, that's all happening again. You got lots of scientists saying this is bad, that's bad, the other thing's bad, and then there are plenty of scientists saying, well, not really, might not be the case, let's wait and see, there's more research, there's this evidence. Stop. It's all beautiful. Step away. You, as a citizen and a parent, and as a living, breathing human being having experiences, you are allowed to have your own understanding of and relationship to your attention. You don't have to wait for a social scientist or a neuroscientist to tell you anything. You can see with your child that your child is having a relationship with living faces that is different from the relationship that the child is developing to cartoon characters on a nonstop screen. So I just really want to empower listeners to remember that their attention is their own and that they have a wisdom in their experience that cannot be controverted by any sort of forms of technical expertise. Because this fight is for the long haul and it's for our humanity. And we can't let anybody start to lecture us about the core of our humanity. That's ours.
I appreciate you making that clarification. I agree, and I'm glad you did. We have a question from our community about the role of boredom in cultivating attention. I know it sounds at odds, but I'm sure you know research shows that boredom can be a healthy catalyst to creativity. Can you say more about boredom?
Oh yeah, I mean, I'm a real like nerd because I'm like an academic, so I could just like, I do a whole graduate seminar just on boredom. In fact, one of my dear colleagues in Poland wrote a beautiful book on the philosophy of boredom, so I get very into this. Walter Benjamin, some of you may have heard, has a beautiful phrase about boredom, that boredom is the dream bird that hatches the egg of experience. So you need to have some experiences, that's the egg, and then you need boredom so that those experiences can hatch into something vital and living. So I couldn't agree more that boredom is really important. I do think that one of the ways that the kind of attention economy has functioned is by disintermediating our capacity to sit with ourselves, and that openness to thought and experience, that is boredom, has been one of the casualties of the kind of accelerationist human fracking project. So I would say very hard to protect the open space that has been called boredom. I think boredom's a bit of a hard sell, so I would usually prefer a term like the open to sort of boredom as such, because you can't really go in there to schools and be like, we want your kids to be more bored. Like the PTA is going to reject that. But I will tell a little quick story from a philosopher and scholar I admire, a guy named Paul North, who's at Yale, who argues that the deepest forms of attention are actually always, in effect, a kind of absent-mindedness. So this is a very powerful and beautiful argument, and it flies in the face of the sort of attention span analysis of attention. What he shows in his beautiful book, The Problem of Distraction, is that what we often will call distraction, that person's distracted, those can be the deepest forms of attention. That kid in the back of the classroom who's staring out the window and the teacher says, Jimmy, you're distracted. All that means is, Jimmy, you're not looking at my math problem here on the board. But Jimmy may be having the most fantastic reverie of the imagination and fomenting in his beautiful little soul his future as a great fantasy novelist. So not everybody who's just kind of lost in dark flow is having amazing attentional experiences, but we want to hold space for the beautiful forms of deepest distraction, because in them there are gifts of richness, of attention that we've only begun to explore. And we don't get to those if we're worried about making our attention span 48 seconds, because that's always going to be that track and trigger kind of attention.
So one of the things that especially concerns me about attention fracking right now is how children in marginalized groups may be especially vulnerable. So, I mentioned to you that we're seeing 40% of 2-year-olds have their own device, and childcare in the United States continues to be prohibitively expensive, which makes it seem like the screen is a bargain babysitter. What do you see as the cost to the most vulnerable members of our community in losing attention?
This is a huge issue and a really powerful one. The most basic thing to say is that each aspect of the structural exploitation that characterizes our largely unregulated and extractive economy falls hardest on those who are in the sort of weakest socioeconomic position. So it's just a covering rule that where people can be harmed, the people that will be harmed will be the people with the least resources to defend themselves. And so the issue to which you've drawn our attention is a classic and harrowing instance of this. I don't have the sort of data at hand to see how this issue is affecting children per se, but I have a lot of confidence that the demographics on those kinds of screen addictive, substitute childcare under overworked, socioeconomically compromised communities, that stuff is just as clear as day if we could get that data. And you may know the Harvard sociologist Bob Putnam, who's written about sort of civic solidarity and its collapse in Bowling Alone and the upswing. He is a big supporter of the attention activism project and this idea that we need to kind of build back in forms of collective solidarity to resist human fracking. And when he did a conversation about human fracking with our group just a month ago, he gave a statistic that bears out what you're saying, which is that if you look at the number of friends that Americans report having over the last 70 years, that number has declined rapidly. And now I'm talking not just about young people, I'm talking about adults as well. But that if you then break that number down by income level and by college education, it's a steeper and more precipitous drop among those with less education who earn less money. So that this harm too, the kind of severing of a sense of community, has fallen disproportionately on the more vulnerable in our country in socioeconomic terms.
You may have heard me say one of the reasons I started MAMA was reporting on growing rates of suicide among not just teens, but in tweens. And I traveled to New Mexico to report on the tween suicide story. And after COVID, when so many folks who had low income jobs were not able to go to work, the woman who ran the suicide prevention center said that there was a decline in children struggling, and she attributed it to the fact that parents were home. And the simple act of kids being able to be with the parent instead of alone with their screen had reduced their stress level. And it was just breathtaking to me. And I agree that this is a whole other big topic that I'm actually plan to be writing about soon.
If I could just quickly, I want to respect a set of confidentialities, but these issues have touched me very, very nearly. One of the folks in our community is someone who lost a daughter to self-harm, for whom questions of the social media challenges were live. And within my own extended family, I've watched how 4 or 5 years ago, the emergence of some restrictive eating by a young person with whom I was very close. You pick up that device, and that kid was being fed, non-stop recipes on TikTok for how to survive eating ice with salt and sesame seeds on it. I saw with my own eyes the kinds of malfeasance fed by the algorithms to kids. Literally, these business models involved holding small children in little boxes and charging, in effect, $5 to anybody who wanted to take a swipe at them. And so this is the reality that you all are fighting, that our community understands is at stake as we talk about attention. And we just have to keep working on this. We cannot let our foot off of the pedal on these issues.
And it is collective solidarity, right? We're working on it from the kids' framework, but we all need to think about our attention in the way that you've been describing, because again, you cannot put a price tag on our humanity. And unless we all take back ownership of our lives, what is it all for?
So if I could just say something about that real quick. If we've learned anything from the last 15 years, it's that culture eats politics for breakfast. So yes, legislation, yes, litigation, yes, regulation, very powerful that your network of like section like heads and leaders are out there on the actual active work of legislation in the states and at the federal level. However, we have to move the conversation at the level of hearts and minds of the people if we're going to really, really affect change. So I would just say that that's got to be part of it. Everybody's got to be thinking culture, culture, culture. That's why education matters. That's why we're about teaching and learning. That's why we're a school, and we sync with folks who are on the forefront of the legislative side of things.
And that's why I'm so grateful you've given us your time today, because the education you're doing right now, I mean, I spend all my time in this space, but you have such a beautiful way of articulating it. I've learned a lot. Before we wrap up, I know we're all wondering, what are some ways we can increase our attention as adults, and what are some ways we can help foster attention in our children? Are there a few examples you want to give us?
Yeah, I mean, we've actually done a whole little kind of workbook on this stuff, and I can always kind of throw some stuff out there, but I'd be remiss if I didn't just show our attention activism toolkit, which is available for download, and it kind of gets into some really, really specific stuff that you can try. I've already said one thing, which is do a little inventory. Where in my life do I feel closer to myself and the world and to other people? Where do I like come up after an hour and feel good? Then identify where those parts of your life lie, put them under the banner of attention activism, and begin taking care of them with others. That's the first step. You're already doing this because there are already places in your life where you feel and experience that goodness. That would be the first thing that I would say, and really the most important thing. The second thing I would say is reach back into your traditions. I don't know what they are. And you may need to invent some new traditions. But we've been really active in going into museums and concert halls and saying, hey, your spaces are attention sanctuaries. That's really important. Think of art and music and sports as a component of your attention activism. We say the same thing about libraries and reading. Those are attention sanctuaries, and that's a key term for us. Your listeners who are kind of curious can check out the article we did on attention sanctuaries, which is a peer-reviewed article in the New York Academy of Sciences Annals Journal. Maybe we can drop the link into the chat thread, or just the chapter on sanctuaries in here. Temporal and spatial sanctuaries. What part of your house is a no device zone? What part of a day is a no device zone? And even if you're going to use your devices, because we're not anti-device, our forms of attention activism are not anti-device. If we're going to use our devices, how are we going to use them so that they make us feel closer to each other and to the world and to ourselves? And there are lots of ways that that can happen. There are many online games that are highly social. There's watching films together. That's very social. And there are even aspects of social media that can be intensely social. And so we never want to make it seem like we're just a bunch of boomers telling the kids to get off their devices. That's not right at all. But the last thing I'll say is even religious traditions. Some of your listeners may have links back into those traditions. Some of them may be very alienated from those traditions. Okay, all good. If those are aspects of your tradition, they provide very powerful language, very powerful practices. Rituals are choreographies of attention. So whether you sort of believe in transubstantiation at the consecration of the Eucharist or not, the way that a mass or a shul or a mosque, or for that matter a zendo, gathers people and choreographs their shared attention is one of the very powerful aspects of those inheritances that we need now more than ever. Although if that's not your jam, that's good. Figure out what your jam is and share it with your friends.
Graham, this has been such a fascinating conversation. Thank you so much. Before we end with my favorite quote from your book, from the philosopher Simone Weil, I want to encourage everyone listening to check out Intensity, the book we've been discussing today, which is available on Mama's Bookshop store. I'm dropping the link into the chat. If you're in the tri-state area, you can take one of the free Attention Lab workshops to explore attentional practice. You can also check out Attention Activism 101 at the schoolofattention.org. And there's also options on there for folks who are not in the tri-state area and want to take the foundational course online. Those in the educational space can explore their coalition resources at Educators for Attention, and all grades are welcome. And we'll include links for each of these in the show notes. As always, I would love for you to participate in our work at MAMA. You can join our mailing list to hear the latest on what we're doing in local communities, as well as our advocacy in states and at the federal level. You can also join a local chapter, or if there isn't one in your area, you can come to one of our monthly chapter leader information sessions to learn how to start one in your community. You can find out more information and sign up for our mailing list at wearemama.org. Finally, Graham, will you mind sharing the quote here that I'm thinking of?
Yeah, I will. It goes right to my heart. Before I do, because this is where we're going to land, I want to say thank you, Julie, for your time. And thanks to your listeners for their time listening and thinking with us about this stuff. And just to say again how much we at the Strother School and the Friends of Attention admire what you at MAMA are doing. And we really are like powerful partner allies in this kind of work, I think. We've just begun an atlas of attention activism. You can find the link to it on our webpage. If you feel that your community, wherever you are, is already meeting and thinking about how to cultivate and nourish attention, we'd love to hear about what you're doing, because we'd like to be able to share that with other people who are trying to start communities like that. So check that out, because we're really interested in learning more about who out there is already doing this kind of work. Simone Weil,
I don't know how to pronounce.
it's pronounced lots of different ways, French, English, and it's a Germanic name originally, but she was French, and a 20th century French mystic, very extraordinary woman, for whom attention, truly human attention, not attention span attention, but the full wild richness of our attention lay at the center of our ethical and political lives. Simone Weil said very beautifully, attention taken to its highest degree is the same thing as prayer. And she really would have us think of the highest forms of attention as tantamount to love. And though that goes a little bit beyond anything you're ever going to get in a bill in the House or the Senate, we think that there's some deep truth in that, and that moms know a lot about that. So keep up the good work.
Indeed, a secular prayer from Mama and the Friends of Attention for all of us. Thank you for joining us. Keep an eye out for the next Expert Insight Series talk coming soon. Thanks again, Graham.
Fight the frackers.
Fight the
Bye.
frackers. Take care.